Hello, and welcome back to another Sunday School lesson. Still haven't gotten to my normal areas, but I'd actually forgotten that you have a sightseeing option on the train, so we're going to try that out. So we can do it from this straight shot. We can do kind of a, looking out shot like that. Return to this shot, or do a forward moving shot. We'll go ahead and start with a forward moving shot. We should be back to the way I normally do things next week, but in case we aren't, we'll probably try a side moving or a different shot of this. So I think it looks cool, and we will proceed. We are in Alma 13 through 16. Enter into the rest of the Lord. So, a lot of bad stuff happens in this lesson. So, Alma and Amulek have been preaching to the people of Ammonihah, and they've actually converted quite a few people. And that doesn't sit easy with the people in charge of Ammonihah. So basically what they do is they imprison Alma and Amulek. They cast out a good chunk of the people who believed, and their families and the people who believed are burnt alive, along with records, spiritual records, and so on of their faith. These were not nice people. Very wicked people did this. So this lesson, there's a lot of really interesting parts of this lesson. And one of the first things it points out is, we'll deal with Amulek and Zeezrom. Amulek was actually quite rich. He lived in the town for a while. He had a pretty good life going on for him before Alma showed up. Once Alma showed up, his life was completely turned upside down, completely destroyed, and he was, if I'm remembering correctly, actually disinherited by his family for his beliefs and for following, the vice of the Lord. So, pretty bad stuff happened to him. And then there was Zeezrom. Zeezrom, if you'll remember from, I think, a lesson or two ago, he was very antagonistic towards Alma and Amulek. He was a lawyer, very smart guy. And he thought to catch them out with lies because, he's a lawyer. Of course he could do that. And he slowly became convinced of the truth of what Alma and Amulek were saying. So when, the rest of the town kind of sees Alma and Amulek, he said, no, these guys are innocent. I'm, far more guilty than these guys. And they basically said, what's wrong with you? You possessed or something? And they kicked him out of town with all of the other people. And Zeezrom just felt extreme guilt because of this. He just felt so incredibly guilty that he was caught up in a sickness, very much like Alma had been many years previously when he realized kind of the graveness of his sins, of his actions. And Zeezrom firmly believed that he had caused the death of Alma and Amulek. But Alma and Amulek were preserved through miraculous means, and eventually found Zeezrom and was able to bless him and forgive him of his sins and cure him of the ailments that his sins had brought upon him. So ultimately good stuff happened, but it wasn't easy for Zeezrom. Certainly wasn't easy for Amulek, for what went on with that. So we'll go ahead and jump right into the lesson. So the first part of the lesson is priesthood ordinances help me receive redemption through Jesus Christ. So there's a part in another part of the scriptures. Actually, I'm half thinking it was Alma. Somebody had asked him this. No, it wasn't Alma. It was Abinadi. Yep, I'm just remembering it now. Asks these supposedly learned priests, where does salvation come from? And they said through the law of Moses, and it's like, no, it comes ultimately through Christ. Law of Moses just helps salvation come. It helps us reach that point where we receive salvation. So priesthood ordinances are quite important because that's what leads us to salvation. It's kind of like a map. A map is not Disneyland, but a map will help us drive to Disneyland. And that's what the ordinances are. And it does, it's very interesting. So the lesson suggests that you look through lesson 13 and just to look at kind of the ordinances and try to identify at least one truth per verse. And it lists several ideas in the book to do it. Like the priesthood is called the order of God's Son. Verse 2, it says God ordains priests to help people look to his Son for redemption. Pretty much all these really interesting things about the priesthood and the ordinances that are a part of it that really help lead us to salvation. And it's some very cool stuff there. So yeah, highly recommended. Read through chapter 13 again and look for these ordinances. Look for these truths about the priesthood and about the ordinances that we receive. And I guarantee it will be worth your while. So we'll move on. So one of the things that it specifically talks about is that priesthood holders were ordained. They were called and prepared from the foundation of this world and ordained, before they are born, to the positions that they will hold. This isn't all a new concept. Similar thing was said to Jeremiah in Jeremiah 1:5 in the Hebrew Bible, or the Old Testament, or whatever you want to call it. Sorry, I've been reading a lot of books about that use different phraseology for things. But Jeremiah 1:5, it says, before I formed thee in the womb, I knew thee. And, I knew what you'd been basically saying. Yes, you've been called to be a prophet before you were born, speaking to Jeremiah. And so the question that the lesson asked is, are priesthood holders the only one called before the foundation of this world? And I'm going to say straight up, no. I think, this lesson specifically says, gives a quote from Spencer W. Kimball. I'll go ahead and read that. He said, "In the world before we came here, faithful women were given certain assignments, while faithful men were foreordained to certain priesthood tasks. While we do not now remember the particulars, this does not alter the glorious reality of what we once agreed to." And, I'm going to take a little step beyond the lesson that people who were around when God's church was not on this planet, was no longer on the face of the land at all. There were good and decent people who were foreordained to live in that time and to do certain things. That doesn't mean they had to do those things. Just simply that they were called to do those things, and ultimately their choices in their lives determined whether they actually did that which they were called to do or not. So we'll leave it right there. So Alma 14. This is one of the harder questions. It says, sometimes God allows the righteous to suffer. And this is one of the biggest contention points, I think, of the church in modern day, and really that people ask of God. It's like, how come God lets bad things happen to good people? A lot of people just kind of say, oh, that's proof God doesn't exist, or, God does exist, but he's really mean. Things like that, and it's not quite like that. So the lesson doesn't really give a straight answer to that. Just lets you know that yes, sometimes righteous people do suffer. That's very true. But I think from my own scripture study, from my own reading, this is just the gospel according to VG philosophy. Make of it what you will. Human beings define themselves by kind of the suffering that we do. We can't really experience joy or happiness if we haven't experienced despair or sadness. We have to to truly be able to experience joy, we have to been pretty darn low to get that high. And it just imagine, just think back in your own lives when you weren't expecting something. You were probably feeling a little down, maybe a little depressed. You weren't expecting anything good to happen in your lives. And then all of a sudden, something good happens. Suddenly, somebody just smiles and says hi to you, maybe. Something that simple. Or maybe somebody just gives you something out of the blue, or somebody does something really nice that you aren't expecting. And you feel so uplifted, so happy by that. that's exactly what I'm talking about. If you hadn't been feeling sad, if you hadn't experienced just not getting, something you wanted, and then suddenly you get it, whether it's, a smile, whether it's a physical gift, whether it's, just some really good food, whatever it is, you enjoy it a lot more because you know what it's like to go without it. And that's, I think, why people are allowed to suffer, so that we can experience so much more. Just imagine if everything was perfect and nothing bad ever happened, nobody ever suffered, nobody ever had to go hungry, like that stuff. It sounds like a great world, but if you actually lived in it all the time, how would you even know what happiness was? It would just be status quo all the time. You wouldn't have experienced this sort of great joy. So, that's my personal opinion. That's what I'm thinking about them. But, yeah, Alma and Amulek really suffered a lot in this chapter. They were basically forced to watch while people were being burnt alive, while the records were being destroyed. It was not a happy and pleasant thing. And to the point where Amulek turns to Alma and says, "We have the power of the Lord on our side. Why don't we do it? Why don't we reach out and do something about this?" And Alma just says, "The spirit constrains me from doing that." And Amulek just, almost kind of in despair, is like, well, maybe they will kill us too. Just kind of, at least it felt to me like a very resigned sort of moment for him, where it's like, oh, I've had a good life type moment. And Alma responds with, just saying, the Lord won't let them kill us because, our time is not done. We have not completed what we need to complete. And true to Alma's word, they didn't kill them, but put them in prison for 3 days. And after, I believe it was 3 days, usually there are a lot of 3 days in the scriptures, if you haven't noticed, but it was a few days. They were imprisoned and spat upon and cursed out by all these people, and until the Lord had mercy upon them and basically shook the entire prison to the ground, and they were able to walk out, having survived just a massive earthquake and being the only survivors of it. So, yes, God does remember us, but not necessarily in our time. So, we will oftentimes in our lives reach a point where we feel like we can't suffer anymore, that we're at our breaking point. And to our surprise, at least this has been my case, when I've been to these moments of despair, is that, things don't automatically get better. They will oftentimes get worse, because while I think I know my own breaking points, the Lord knows them a lot better than I do, and He knows how far we will go before He will help us. And it's just a question of us having faith. Because if we knew exactly when our suffering would end, what would be the point of suffering? It's kind of a complex idea. But yeah, or let me rephrase that. What would we learn from suffering if we knew exactly when it would end? And I don't think we could really learn anything from suffering at that point. So that leads into the final little section of the lesson, which says discipleship requires sacrifice. I just remember a photograph of the Lord, or painting, I should say, of the Lord, where it says, "I did not say it would be easy, I only said it would be worth it." And that is very, very true. We're not being asked to do something super easy. And I used the metaphor a lot in the last lesson, but the video game metaphor is very much there. If you want your character to be able to have all the cool abilities and to, you know, do all the fun stuff, be able to go all the places that the character normally goes, you basically, you have to work, put in the time and effort into the game to get that reward. Now, you know, it may seem a bit silly, you know, speaking of all the time and effort that people do put into video games, but that's kind of how they work, and that's the same is true of spiritual things. They may seem silly from the outside. I mean, going to church every week, you know, reading the scriptures every day, doing all that time and effort that you put into it. A lot of people just kind of look at it and go like, why bother? You know, I'll go out and do something fun. I'll you know, I'll read this, you know, really, really fun mystery novel instead. And there's nothing wrong with reading the mystery novel, but if you truly want to be a disciple of Christ, you have to put the mystery novel aside for a little while you read scriptures. You have to make those sacrifices. And usually, you know, once you start doing them, you realize they're not that big of a sacrifice. You know, they're just a little bit of time here and there, a little bit of effort here and there, and then you suddenly realize that, oh, this is easy. I can do this. This is really super easy to do once you start doing it. And it's just a matter of us convincing ourselves that, hey, we need to make these sacrifices, we need to do things. Now, Alma and Amulek, odds are we probably won't be in their position of having to sacrifice so much that they did, literally to watch people that they'd converted to the gospel be burned alive because of us converting them, or being instruments in the Lord's hand to convert them. Odds are we will never have to do that, and thank goodness for that. But, you know, in many ways it's just a little bit harder. You know, there's an old saying, it's easy to die for a cause. It's much harder to live for the cause. And the same is true of the gospel of Christ. It's very easy to be a martyr, to just die for the gospel of Christ. It's a lot harder to live it every single day and have it be a part of our lives. You know, it's so easy at the end of a hard day to just say, I'm just going straight to bed. I don't have time to read scriptures. I'm too tired, and fall asleep. And it's ultimately, we have to figure out what we should do and how we should do it. And yeah, I will leave that decision up to you. I'll leave you with one final metaphor that's in the kind of the ideas for teaching this. It just basically, as you look at these verses, you know, you could picture washing something, like some white clothes or something. And then, you know, how does it feel to put on clean clothes as opposed to, you know, when you're like really dirty, you've been outside, you're in the mud and stuff, working hard or playing hard or whatever it is you're doing, and then you come in and you get showered, you get changed, and you put on fresh, clean clothes. How much better that feels. And that's ultimately what it's all about. It takes us some effort to get changed out of our clothes, to wash our clothes, to take a shower, to do all that stuff. But we feel so much better after we've done it. And that's really what it's like to be a disciple of Christ. A lot of effort followed by, I feel so much better, so much lighter, so much cleaner than I did before. And it can take a lot, but it's ultimately worth it. I think that's the main point of the lesson there. So we'll skip back into, yep, Evie looking out the window there. So let me know what you think. Let me know if you like actually this format of just watching out the window instead of walking in a park. I think they both kind of work, but I'd love to hear what you think. Like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.